My name is Alfred Wilson, and at 67 years old, I never thought I would experience homelessness. After teaching history for 3 decades, I believed my golden years would be peaceful. When my only son Michael died in that terrible accident, my world collapsed. But nothing prepared me for what came next. At the funeral reception, my daughter-in-law Amanda looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Don't be dramatic. Pack your bags and learn to survive." If you're watching this from your comfortable home, take a moment to hit that subscribe button, because not everyone has the security you're enjoying right now. I spent 30 years of my life teaching American history to high school students in Portland, Oregon. My classroom walls were covered with historical maps and presidential portraits that watched over thousands of teenagers who passed through my care. I loved teaching, helping young minds connect the dots between past events and present realities. My students often told me I had a gift for making dusty historical figures come alive through storytelling. My wife Sarah and I had Michael later in life. She was 42, and I was 40 when our miracle baby arrived. Sarah had been told she couldn't have children, so Michael truly felt like a blessing. He was a bright, curious boy with his mother's warm brown eyes and my stubborn chin. Our family was small but complete. When Michael turned 12, our world shattered. Sarah was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, but my strong-willed wife fought for nearly a year before the disease finally took her. Michael and I were devastated. We had built our lives around this remarkable woman, and suddenly she was gone, leaving a gaping hole neither of us knew how to fill. Raising a teenage son alone wasn't something I had prepared for. Michael retreated into silence after his mother died, spending hours in his room building elaborate structures with engineering sets. I worried constantly, checking parenting books from the library and attending support groups for single fathers. Many nights I sat at the kitchen table grading papers until dawn, wondering if I was doing enough, being enough for my grieving son. Slowly, painfully, we learned to function as a duo rather than a trio. I taught Michael to cook Sarah's recipes, and we established new rituals. Sunday mornings became our time for pancakes and planning the week ahead. We took summer road trips across the country, visiting historical sites I had only lectured about in my classroom. Through shared grief, our bond strengthened. Michael grew into a thoughtful, determined young man who carried his mother's compassion and my love of learning. His hard work earned him a scholarship to study engineering at Stanford. I remember the day his acceptance letter arrived. We both cried, knowing Sarah would have been so proud. College transformed my quiet son into a confident professional. After graduation, he was recruited by a prestigious engineering firm in Seattle, specializing in sustainable building design. Michael threw himself into his career, quickly earning promotions and respect within the company. It was at a charity gala hosted by his firm that Michael first met Amanda Pearson. He called me that night, unusually animated, describing a beautiful marketing executive with brilliant ideas and a dazzling smile. They dated for 8 months before Michael brought her to Portland to meet me. Amanda was certainly striking, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an impeccable fashion sense that seemed out of place in my modest home. She was polite, though I noticed how her eyes assessed everything, as if calculating values. "Dad, isn't she amazing?" Michael asked later, his expression hopeful and vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "She seems very accomplished," I replied carefully. Something about Amanda's perfectly curated responses made me uneasy, but I couldn't identify why. Perhaps it was the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, or how she subtly redirected conversations toward material possessions and status. But Michael was happier than I had seen him in years, so I pushed my reservations aside. When Michael announced their engagement 5 years ago, I threw them an engagement party at my favorite local restaurant. Amanda seemed disappointed by the venue, making comments about quaint little places that felt more condescending than complimentary. Still, Michael was beaming, and I reminded myself that my opinion wasn't what mattered. Their wedding was an elaborate affair at an exclusive Seattle venue, with hundreds of guests I didn't recognize. Amanda's parents, Wealthy real estate developers from Connecticut spared no expense. I felt out of place among the designer suits and champagne towers, but Michael's joy was worth my discomfort. After 35 years of teaching, retirement was approaching, and my modest home in Portland needed significant repairs. During one of our weekly phone calls, Michael proposed a solution that took me by surprise. "Dad, Amanda and I have been talking. We have that guest house on our property that's just sitting empty. Why don't you sell your place and move in with us? We'd love to have you closer." The offer seemed generous, though I suspected it was more Michael's idea than Amanda's. Still, the thought of being near my only child during retirement held tremendous appeal. I sold my Portland home, contributing the proceeds toward improvements on their guest house, creating a comfortable one-bedroom space on their expansive Seattle property. Michael and Amanda lived well. Their main house was a stunning contemporary design with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington. Michael's success at the firm had brought financial security, and Amanda's marketing career added to their affluence. They hosted elaborate dinner parties for colleagues and potential clients, maintaining a social calendar that left me dizzy. I settled into a quiet routine, tending to the property gardens and finding purpose in being available when needed. Michael and I established a tradition of Saturday morning coffee on my porch, catching up without the distractions of his busy life. During these moments, I glimpsed my son beneath the successful executive exterior. "The firm is expanding, Dad," he confided one morning, 6 months before the accident. "I'm being considered to head the new Sustainable Development Division." His excitement was palpable, though I noticed new lines of stress around his eyes. "That's wonderful, son. But are you getting enough rest? You look tired." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just been intense lately. The expansion requires significant capital investment. Amanda and I have leveraged quite a bit personally to make it happen." "Is that wise?" I asked, concerned by the shadows in his expression. "It's calculated risk, Dad. The potential return justifies it." He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." The last truly happy memory I have with Michael was the night before the accident. Amanda was away visiting her parents, so Michael suggested we have dinner together. We grilled steaks on the patio and talked for hours about everything and nothing, the way we used to during those road trips long ago. He seemed lighter without Amanda's presence, laughing at my corny jokes and sharing stories about his college days I had never heard. "I'm glad you're here, Dad," he said as we watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Having you close by these past few years has meant everything to me." I had no way of knowing those would be the last words my son would ever say to me. No way to prepare for how quickly life can shatter, or how those we trust can reveal themselves in the aftermath. The morning dawned clear and bright, a beautiful September day that gave no hint of the devastation to come. I was pruning roses in the garden when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A police cruiser pulled up, and immediately my heart began to race. In my 67 years, I had learned that unexpected visits from police officers rarely bring good news. 2 officers approached, their expressions somber. The female officer introduced herself as Sergeant Martinez, while her partner hung back slightly. There was a gentleness in her voice that sent ice through my veins before she even spoke the words that would forever divide my life into before and after. "Mr. Wilson, I'm very sorry to inform you that your son, Michael Wilson, was involved in a fatal car accident this morning." The world tilted beneath my feet. I remember reaching for the garden bench, missing, and suddenly finding myself on the ground. Sergeant Martinez knelt beside me, her hand on my shoulder as she continued explaining something about a truck crossing the center line on the highway, but her words seemed to come from very far away, muffled by the roaring in my ears. "There was nothing anyone could have done," she said. "He died instantly." I don't remember much of the next few hours. The officers helped me into the house and called Amanda, who was still at her parents' home in Connecticut. When she answered, Sergeant Martinez explained the situation, then handed the phone to me. I expected to hear sobbing, screaming, some reflection of the raw anguish tearing through my own chest. Instead, Amanda's voice was controlled, almost businesslike. "I'll book the next flight back," she said. "Have you contacted the funeral home yet?" Her practical response left me momentarily speechless. "Amanda, Michael is gone," I managed, my voice breaking. "Our boy is gone." "Yes, I understand that, Alfred," she replied, her tone maddeningly steady. "And there are arrangements that need to be made. I'll handle everything when I return tomorrow." True to her word, Amanda arrived the following day and immediately took control of the funeral arrangements. She selected an expensive casket, organized a service at an exclusive venue, and arranged for catering that seemed more appropriate for a corporate event than a funeral. When I suggested incorporating elements that reflected Michael's personality, his love of the outdoors, or his passion for sustainable architecture, Amanda dismissed my ideas. "This needs to be dignified and appropriate," she said. "Many of Michael's colleagues and clients will attend." The day of the funeral arrived, a blur of black suits and murmured condolences. I delivered a eulogy that came straight from my broken heart, sharing stories of Michael as a curious little boy, a determined student, and a compassionate man. Throughout my speech, I noticed Amanda checking her phone, her expression more impatient than grieving. After the service, people gathered at the house for the reception. Several of Michael's closest friends approached me, sharing memories that momentarily lightened the crushing weight of grief. One colleague mentioned a sustainable housing project Michael had been particularly passionate about, a development for low-income families that incorporated innovative green technology. "He was so excited about breaking ground next month," the young man said. Michael mentioned he had personally invested in making sure it happened, even when some of the board members wavered. This was news to me. Michael hadn't mentioned personal investment in any specific project. As I pondered this information, I noticed Amanda in deep conversation with Richard Lawson, Michael's business partner. Their heads were close together, the discussion appearing intense and private. When they noticed my gaze, they quickly separated, Richard offering me a tight smile before moving to speak with other guests. That evening, after everyone had left, I approached Amanda about the financial matters we would need to address. With Michael gone, I assumed we would need to review his will, insurance policies, and the status of the home we shared. "Not now, Alfred," she said, waving away my concerns. "There's plenty of time for that later." But over the next few days, I began noticing troubling behaviors. Amanda spent hours in Michael's home office, with the door locked. Several times I overheard tense phone conversations that abruptly ended when she realized I was nearby. She began receiving frequent visits from Richard, always conducting their discussions behind closed doors. 5 days after the funeral, I woke in the middle of the night, restless and grief-stricken, as had become my norm. Seeking the comfort of a cup of tea, I made my way to the kitchen, only to freeze at the sound of rustling papers coming from Michael's office. The door was ajar, spilling a thin line of light into the darkened hallway. Quietly, I approached and peered inside. Amanda was frantically searching through filing cabinets, pulling out documents, scanning them, and either returning them or placing them in a separate pile. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her movements urgent and focused. Without thinking, I pushed the door open wider. "Amanda, what are you doing?" She startled violently, papers scattering across the floor. For a split second, her face registered something close to guilt before quickly composing into irritation. "You shouldn't sneak up on people like that," she snapped, bending to gather the fallen documents. "I wasn't sneaking. It's 3 a.m. What are you looking for?" "Just trying to get our affairs in order," she replied, straightening the papers with sharp, angry movements. "Someone has to deal with the practical matters." "I've been asking to discuss those practical matters," I reminded her, including Michael's will and the house arrangement. Something cold flickered across Amanda's face. "The house arrangement?" "Yes. Since I contributed the proceeds from my Portland home toward improvements here, we should discuss next steps." Amanda laughed, a harsh sound completely devoid of humor. Your contribution was a gift, Alfred. This house is solely in my name. The floor seemed to drop beneath me for the second time that week. That can't be right. Michael and I discussed this thoroughly. My funds were meant as an investment in our shared living arrangement. Do you have that in writing? Her voice was like ice. Because all the legal documentation shows this property belongs exclusively to me. Your investment, as you call it, was simply a gift from a father to his son and daughter-in-law. There's no ownership stake for you here. That's not what Michael and I agreed to, I protested, my mind racing to recall the exact conversations we'd had. Had I been so trusting of my son that I hadn't ensured proper legal protection? Well, Michael isn't here to confirm your version, is he? Amanda gathered the papers into a neat stack, her composure fully restored. We'll discuss this further when I've had time to review everything. Go back to bed, Alfred. I returned to the guest house, but sleep was impossible. Dawn found me at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, mind spinning with implications. Something was very wrong, and the woman my son had married was at the center of it. The week following my late-night discovery was filled with mounting tension. Amanda avoided being alone with me, leaving early for work and returning late. When our paths did cross, her responses to my questions about Michael's affairs were curt and evasive. Each day, the distance between us grew, transforming from uncomfortable silence to open hostility. 10 days after the funeral, I returned from a walk to find several of my possessions, including books and framed photographs, stacked in boxes in the garage. Confused and alarmed, I immediately sought out Amanda, finding her in the living room with a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone. "Why are my things in the garage?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. Amanda didn't look up from her screen. "I'm reorganizing. The guest house would function better as a home office now." The casual cruelty of her statement left me momentarily speechless. "That's my home," I finally managed. "Where exactly am I supposed to go?" Now she did look up, her expression devoid of empathy. "That's not really my concern, Alfred. You're a grown man. Figure it out." "Amanda, I sold my house to move here. I put that money into this property, into building a life near my son, and now your son is gone." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "Things change. I need to move forward with my life, and having my father-in-law living in my backyard isn't part of the plan." I struggled to comprehend the coldness of the woman before me. Where was the grief? Where was the shared sense of loss for the man we had both loved? "I have nowhere to go," I said, hating the pleading note in my voice. "Most of my retirement savings went into the guest house improvements. I can't just leave." Amanda set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. "Don't be dramatic, Alfred. Pack your bags and learn to survive. Everyone does." The words hit like physical blows. How can you say that? After everything we've been through? After losing Michael? "Michael made certain choices that have left me in a difficult position," she replied, an edge of bitterness creeping into her tone. "I have to protect myself now." "What choices? What are you talking about?" "That's none of your concern. What is clear is that you need to make arrangements to leave. I'll give you until the end of the week." Panic rose in my chest. "Amanda, please. I contributed almost $80,000 to this property. That was nearly everything I had from selling my home." Her laugh was sharp, dismissive. "As I already told you, that was a gift. There's no paperwork stating otherwise. You have no legal claim here." "I'll speak to a lawyer," I threatened, desperation making my voice shake. "Go ahead. You'll find I'm well within my rights." She stood, smoothing her immaculate clothing. "You have until Friday. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property." I spent the next 24 hours in a daze, calling every friend and former colleague who might offer temporary housing. To my dismay, most were either unavailable or unable to help. Some had downsized in retirement, others had moved to be near grandchildren, and a few, I painfully realized, had been Michael's friends more than mine. My teaching pension and Social Security wouldn't cover even the most modest apartment rental in Seattle's expensive market, at least not until I could access additional retirement funds. With each rejection, the reality of my situation became clearer. At 67 years old, grieving my only child, I was about to become homeless. Friday morning arrived with cruel sunshine, as if the universe were mocking my circumstances. I packed everything I could fit into my 10-year-old sedan. A few clothes, photo albums, important documents, and the small box containing Sarah's ashes that I had always planned to have interred with mine. Looking at the overstuffed car, I realized how little of material value I had to show for nearly 7 decades of life. Amanda watched from the kitchen window as I made my final trip from the guest house to the car. She hadn't spoken to me since our confrontation, communicating only through a formal email, reiterating the deadline for my departure. As I closed the trunk, she emerged onto the porch, arms crossed. "I've left the key on the counter," I said, my voice hollow. She nodded once, her expression unreadable. I took a last look at the guest house, where I had expected to live out my remaining years, at the garden I had tenderly cultivated, at the property where my son's laughter had once filled the air. Then I got into my car and drove away, with no destination in mind and nowhere to call home. The first night was the hardest. I parked in a shopping center lot, reclining the driver's seat as far as it would go, which wasn't nearly enough for my 6-foot frame. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by passing cars, security patrols, and the constant fear of being discovered and moved along. When dawn finally broke, I found myself sobbing uncontrollably, great heaving cries that shook my entire body. "Michael," I whispered to the empty car, "I don't know how to do this without you." There was no answer, just the early morning sounds of a city waking up, oblivious to my private devastation. The routine of homelessness established itself with surprising speed. Each morning, I would wake stiff and disoriented in my reclined car seat, momentarily confused about where I was before reality crashed back. I developed a system for basic survival. A 24-hour gym membership purchased with my credit card provided access to showers and restrooms. Public libraries offered warmth, internet access, and a place to sit without purchasing anything. Fast food restaurant dollar menus became my primary source of nutrition. My financial situation was precarious. I had a small teacher's pension and Social Security, but much of my savings had gone into the guest house improvements. What remained was tied up in retirement accounts that would take time and penalties to access. The few $100s I had in my checking account wouldn't last long in a city as expensive as Seattle. Multiple times, I tried contacting Amanda. I called, texted, and emailed, hoping to negotiate some temporary arrangement, or at least retrieve more of my belongings from storage. Every attempt went unanswered. When I drove past the house one afternoon, I noticed with a sinking heart that a locksmith was changing the gate code and door locks. The message was clear. I was no longer welcome on the property that had been my home. Each day, I visited Michael's grave at Evergreen Cemetery, finding solace in the quiet, manicured grounds. I would sit on the small bench I had purchased, talking to my son as if he could hear me, sharing the indignities of my new existence and the overwhelming grief that never seemed to lessen. "Your mother would be so disappointed in me," I told him one afternoon, watching shadows from nearby trees dance across his headstone. "She always said I was too trusting, too willing to believe the best of people. She would have insisted on proper legal documentation for the house arrangement. Living in my car took a physical toll I wasn't prepared for. At 67, my body protested the cramped sleeping quarters with new aches each morning. Proper hygiene became a constant challenge. Despite showering at the gym, my clothes grew wrinkled and stale-smelling from being stored in the trunk. I lost weight rapidly, my already thin frame becoming gaunt as stress suppressed my appetite and healthy food remained an unaffordable luxury. The emotional toll was even greater. Grief for Michael mixed with shame about my circumstances, creating a toxic blend that darkened my thoughts. I avoided places where I might encounter anyone who knew me, terrified of explaining my situation. When former students or colleagues appeared at the library or coffee shops I frequented, I would duck away, hiding behind bookshelves or exiting quickly to avoid conversation. 2 weeks into my homelessness, Seattle's famous rain arrived with vengeance. For 3 days straight, water pounded the roof of my car, the constant drumming preventing even the fitful sleep I had grown accustomed to. On the third night, parked in the far corner of a grocery store lot, I reached my breaking point. Exhausted, hungry, and soaked from a dash to the public restroom, I sat behind the steering wheel and contemplated ending it all. How simple it would be to drive to one of the towering bridges spanning Puget Sound and just step off into the dark waters below. The thought wasn't entirely new. It had been flickering at the edges of my consciousness since Michael's death, growing stronger with each humiliating day of my new reality. I went so far as to start the engine, hands shaking on the wheel, when a sharp rap on my window startled me from my dark thoughts. A middle-aged woman in a grocery store uniform stood in the rain, concern evident on her face. I rolled down the window, expecting to be told to move my car. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked, rain soaking her uniform cap. "You've been sitting here for hours." I opened my mouth to offer some explanation, but found myself unable to speak, tears mixing with raindrops on my face. The woman, whose name tag read Gloria, seemed to understand without words. "I get off in 20 minutes. There's a diner across the street that stays open all night. I'll buy you a hot meal." That simple act of kindness from a stranger pulled me back from the edge. Over lukewarm coffee and a plate of eggs and toast, Gloria listened without judgment as I shared fragments of my story. She couldn't offer housing, but she pressed $40 into my hand before leaving, ignoring my protests. "My father was homeless for a while after Vietnam," she explained. "Someone helped him when it mattered. Just pass it on someday." Small mercies began appearing after that night. A librarian named Paul noticed I spent entire days at the public library and started saving a quiet corner desk for me, occasionally bringing an extra sandwich from his lunch. The manager at a cafe where I sometimes purchased coffee stopped charging me for refills, discreetly sliding pastries that would otherwise be discarded onto my table at closing time. While these kindnesses sustained me physically, finding emotional support proved more challenging. I discovered a grief support group that met weekly at a community center, but couldn't bring myself to attend more than once. How could I explain that I was mourning not only my son, but also my home, my dignity, my sense of security in the world? The one bright moment during this dark period came unexpectedly. While washing my hands in a public restroom, I glanced up to see a vaguely familiar face reflected in the mirror next to mine. The young man did a double take, then broke into a smile of recognition. "Mr. Wilson? It's Darius Johnson. I was in your American Revolution seminar back in 2008. For a moment, I considered pretending he had mistaken me for someone else, shame about my appearance overwhelming me. But something in his genuine smile broke through my defenses. "Darius," I said, my voice rusty from disuse. "Of course I remember you. You wrote that excellent paper on the economic factors driving colonial resistance." His face lit up at being remembered. "That class changed everything for me. I'm teaching history myself now, at Roosevelt High." We talked briefly about his career and students, the conversation blessedly normal. He didn't comment on my disheveled appearance or ask personal questions. As we parted ways, he handed me his card. "If you're ever interested in speaking to my classes about your teaching experiences, I'd love to have you as a guest lecturer." I tucked the card into my wallet, a tangible reminder that I was still the same person, still the dedicated teacher and thoughtful father I had always been, despite my current circumstances. That identity remained, even as everything else had been stripped away. On the 15th day of living in my car, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, suspecting yet another collection call for Amanda, whose name was still linked to my contact information with several retailers. Something made me press the green button anyway. a decision that would ultimately change everything. "Is this Alfred Wilson?" The male voice on the phone was polite but formal. "Yes, speaking." I adjusted my position in the driver's seat, wincing as my stiff back protested. "Mr. Wilson, my name is Thomas Wilson, no relation." A small chuckle. "I'm the senior counsel at Westbrook Engineering, where your son Michael was employed. I've been trying to reach you for several days." My heart rate quickened. "I apologize. My living situation has been complicated recently." "So I've gathered," he replied, his tone shifting slightly. "Mr. Wilson, I believe we should meet in person. There are matters regarding your son's estate that require immediate attention. Would tomorrow at 10 be possible? At my office downtown?" I glanced down at my wrinkled clothes and the empty fast food bags littering the passenger seat. The prospect of presenting myself in a professional office seemed insurmountable. "I'm not sure that I can." There was a pause. "Mr. Wilson, I don't want to alarm you, but this is quite urgent. If coming to my office is difficult, perhaps I could meet you somewhere more convenient." Something in his voice, a note of genuine concern, made me reconsider. "No, I'll come to you. Could you text me the address?" After ending the call, panic set in. I had exactly $27 to my name until my next Social Security deposit, and no appropriate clothing for a meeting with a corporate lawyer. With few options, I spent 14 precious dollars at a thrift store, purchasing the least worn dress shirt and slacks I could find. The remaining money went toward having my one decent jacket professionally pressed at a 1-hour dry cleaner. That night, I splurged on a cheap motel room, unable to face an important meeting without proper sleep and a thorough shower. The sagging mattress felt like luxury after 2 weeks in my car. I washed my new used clothes in the bathroom sink and hung them to dry overnight, then set the alarm on my phone for early morning. The next day, I arrived at the impressive glass tower housing Westbrook Engineering 15 minutes early, my heart pounding with anxiety. The receptionist directed me to the 22nd floor, where a sleek waiting area displayed architectural models of the firm's award-winning sustainable buildings. Several featured Michael's distinctive design elements, sending a fresh wave of grief through me. "Mr. Wilson," a tall man with salt and pepper hair approached, hand extended. "Thomas Wilson, thank you for coming." He led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. A young woman was already seated at the table, surrounded by stacks of folders and a laptop. "This is Sophia Benton, one of our junior associates," Thomas explained. "She's been assisting me with your son's affairs." Sophia offered a sympathetic smile. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Wilson." "Thank you," I replied automatically, the phrase having lost all meaning after hundreds of repetitions at the funeral. Thomas gestured toward a silver carafe. "Coffee? Or perhaps tea?" "Coffee would be wonderful." My voice sounded strange in the formal setting, as if it belonged to someone else. As Sophia poured the coffee, Thomas studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Wilson, forgive my directness, but are you currently without permanent housing?" Heat rushed to my face. Despite my best efforts with the thrift store clothes and the motel shower, my circumstances were apparently written all over me. "I'm in transition," I managed, the euphemism tasting bitter. Thomas exchanged a glance with Sophia. "I see. And this situation developed after your son's passing?" "Yes. There were complications with living arrangements." "With Amanda Wilson, your daughter-in-law?" His tone remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. "Yes." I didn't elaborate, unsure how much to reveal about my humiliating eviction. Thomas nodded, seeming to come to a decision. "Mr. Wilson, I'm going to be very direct with you. Your son Michael came to see me approximately 3 months before his death. He was concerned about certain financial decisions being made by his wife and wanted to ensure that his assets were protected in case of contingencies." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "What kind of contingencies?" Michael suspected Amanda might be involved with his business partner, Richard Lawson. Thomas's voice was gentle but clear. He also had concerns about large financial transfers she had made to private accounts without his knowledge. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Are you saying Michael knew Amanda was being unfaithful? He had suspicions, nothing concrete, but it was enough to prompt him to take precautionary measures. Thomas slid a folder across the table. Michael created a separate will, one that Amanda is unaware of. It was not handled by their family attorney, but directly through our legal department, with me as executor. With trembling hands, I opened the folder to find a detailed legal document bearing my son's familiar signature. As I scanned the pages, key phrases jumped out. 50% of all assets to my father, Alfred Wilson. Life insurance policy in the amount of $1 million. Private investment account at First Meridian Bank. I don't understand, I said, looking up from the document. Amanda told me everything was in her name. The house, the accounts, everything. Thomas's expression hardened slightly. That is what she believes, and what she has likely been told by the family attorney, who was only aware of their joint will created when they first married. However, Michael updated his arrangements without her knowledge. Why are you only telling me this now? It's been nearly 3 weeks since Michael died. We tried contacting you multiple times at the house number and address we had on file. When those attempts failed, we became concerned. Thomas leaned forward. Yesterday, we received notification that Amanda has filed paperwork to transfer all of Michael's company shares to herself and is attempting to access several accounts that were specifically excluded from the joint holdings. She's trying to take everything, I murmured, the full impact of Amanda's betrayal finally becoming clear. Yes, and she's moving quickly. Thomas glanced at Sophia, who nodded and began typing rapidly on her laptop. We need to file for an immediate injunction to prevent any further transfers until the will can be properly executed. But first, Mr. Wilson, we need to address your housing situation. The unexpected shift in topic caught me off guard. My housing? As Michael's father and a major beneficiary of his estate, your welfare is directly connected to this case. We cannot have you living in your car while we prepare for what might become a significant legal battle. My face burned with embarrassment. How did you know I was living in my car? Thomas's expression softened. When our calls to the house went unanswered, we hired a private investigator to locate you. He observed your situation 2 days ago, but was unable to approach you before you drove away. Sophia spoke up for the first time. We've arranged temporary accommodations for you at the Madison Hotel, Mr. Wilson. It's just 3 blocks from here, and the firm will cover all expenses until your financial situation is stabilized. I was overwhelmed by this sudden reversal of fortune, my mind struggling to process both the betrayal by Amanda and the unexpected lifeline being offered. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept our help, Thomas replied simply. Michael spoke of you often, and with great admiration. He would be horrified to know what has happened. That afternoon, I found myself in a comfortable hotel room with a proper bed, a hot shower, and room service at my disposal. The contrast to my previous 2 weeks was so stark that I sat on the edge of the bed for nearly an hour, afraid to touch anything lest it all disappear like a cruel hallucination. When hunger finally drove me to order a simple meal, I wept at the first bite of real food, the warmth and flavor overwhelming after weeks of fast food and granola bars. With a full stomach and clean clothes, Thomas had arranged for basic necessities to be delivered. I slept for 14 hours straight, the first uninterrupted rest since before Michael's death. The next morning, Thomas called with an update. We filed the injunction. Amanda has been formally notified that all financial transactions related to Michael's estate are frozen pending legal review. She's not happy, to put it mildly. What happens next? I asked, watching sunlight stream through the hotel window, a simple pleasure that had been unavailable in my car. We meet with her and her attorney tomorrow to present Michael's will and discuss next steps. I should warn you, this could get contentious. Would you feel comfortable attending? The thought of facing Amanda made my stomach clench, but something had shifted within me. The helplessness and despair that had defined the past weeks was giving way to a quiet determination. My son had tried to protect me, even when I had failed to protect myself. I would not waste his final gift. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'll be there." "Excellent." Thomas sounded pleased. "In the meantime, I've arranged for a financial advisor to meet with you this afternoon. There are decisions that need to be made regarding Michael's accounts and investments." As I hung up, I moved to the hotel window, looking out at the Seattle skyline that had seemed so indifferent to my suffering just days before. For the first time since Michael's death, I felt a flicker of something that resembled hope, fragile but persistent. "I'm still here, son," I whispered to the empty room, "and I'm not going anywhere." The conference room at Westbrook Engineering felt different the second time I entered it. Where before I had been disoriented and overwhelmed, now I walked in with purpose, dressed in a new suit Thomas had insisted on having delivered to my hotel room. "Presentation matters in these situations," he had explained, and I couldn't argue with his logic. Amanda was already seated when I arrived, flanked by a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit who I assumed was her attorney. Her eyes widened slightly at my transformed appearance, then narrowed with calculation. She had clearly expected me to appear defeated and disheveled, an easy target for dismissal. "Alfred," she acknowledged coolly. "I'm surprised to see you here." "I imagine you are," I replied, taking a seat directly across from her. The confidence in my voice surprised even me. Thomas entered with Sophia and 2 additional attorneys from the firm. Introductions were made, documents distributed, and the meeting officially began. What followed was one of the most extraordinarily tense 3 hours of my life. Thomas methodically presented Michael's separate will, explaining its legal standing and the specific provisions that overrode the joint will Amanda had been operating under. Her attorney, James Harrington, initially attempted to challenge the document's validity, suggesting it had been created under duress or without proper legal guidance. "This will was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed with the state," Thomas countered, sliding certification documents across the table. Additionally, Michael recorded a video statement explaining his reasons for creating a separate will, which we're prepared to play, if necessary. The mention of a video visibly rattled Amanda. Her perfect composure slipped for the first time, a flash of panic crossing her face before she regained control. "That won't be necessary at this time," Harrington interjected quickly. "We're simply trying to understand the circumstances." The meeting progressed to specific assets and their disposition. I listened in growing disbelief as Thomas outlined the extent of Michael's foresight. My son had not only created a separate will, but had also established accounts and investments that Amanda couldn't access, including a substantial life insurance policy with me as the sole beneficiary. "What about the house?" Amanda demanded when Thomas finished his overview. "Alfred has no claim to my home." "Actually," Thomas replied, opening another folder, "while the primary residence is indeed solely in your name, the guest house and the acre of land it sits on were legally subdivided and transferred to Michael's private holdings 6 months ago, with proper permits and registration. That property now passes to his father as specified in the will." I stared at Thomas in shock. This was the first I'd heard of any property division. Amanda's reaction was even more dramatic. She half rose from her chair, face flushed with anger. "That's impossible. I would have known about any property division." Thomas slid the property records across the table. The paperwork was processed through the firm's real estate division at Michael's request. He specifically asked that the matter be handled discreetly. Amanda turned to her attorney, whispering furiously. After a brief consultation, Harrington cleared his throat. "We'll need time to verify these documents and consult with our client." "Of course," Thomas agreed smoothly. "However, the temporary injunction remains in effect until all matters are resolved. No assets should be transferred or accounts accessed outside of normal living expenses." Amanda glared at me across the table. "This is ridiculous. Michael would never have done this to me." I met her gaze steadily. Michael protected what mattered to him. He always did. The meeting concluded with agreements for follow-up consultations and document reviews. As we prepared to leave, Amanda approached me directly, her voice low and venomous. "You won't win this, old man. I have resources you can't imagine." I should have felt intimidated, but instead found myself feeling oddly calm. "This isn't about winning, Amanda. It's about honoring my son's wishes." The legal proceedings that followed were complex and often tedious. Depositions were taken, financial records examined, and expert witnesses consulted. Throughout it all, Thomas and his team guided me with patience and determination, explaining complicated legal concepts and preparing me for each new development. 3 weeks after our initial confrontation, we received the first major break in the case. Sophia discovered financial records showing that Amanda had transferred nearly $200,000 from joint accounts to a private account in the Cayman Islands just 2 days after Michael's death. When confronted with this evidence, Amanda's legal team quickly shifted strategy, moving from aggressive opposition to settlement negotiations. "She knows she's been caught," Thomas explained during one of our daily briefings. "Now she's trying to salvage what she can." The settlement discussions were delicate, with proposals and counter-proposals flying back and forth between legal teams. Amanda's initial offers were dismissed outright as insultingly inadequate. It was during this period that Thomas arranged for me to meet with several of Michael's colleagues, including his executive assistant Diane, who had worked closely with him for 5 years. Michael was worried those last few months. Diane confided during our lunch meeting. He mentioned concerns about Richard and Amanda spending time together when he was traveling. Once, he returned early from a Chicago trip and found them having dinner at a restaurant across town, even though both had told him they were working late at separate locations. This information, while painful to hear, provided additional context for Michael's protective legal maneuvers. When presented with statements from multiple colleagues regarding Amanda's relationship with Richard, her legal resistance weakened further. The final breakthrough came unexpectedly. Richard Lawson, perhaps sensing that he was about to be drawn deeper into the legal conflict, approached Thomas directly with a proposal. In exchange for immunity from any potential lawsuits, he would provide evidence of Amanda's attempts to manipulate company finances after Michael's death, including forged signatures on transfer documents. "This changes everything," Thomas explained, showing me the evidence Richard had provided. "With proof of attempted fraud, Amanda's position is untenable." 2 months after Michael's death, we finally reached the courtroom for a formal hearing. Judge Eleanor Martinez, a stern woman with penetrating eyes and a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, presided over the proceedings. The courtroom was tense. As attorneys presented arguments, evidence was entered into record, and witnesses testified to various aspects of the case. When Amanda took the stand, her performance was masterful, portraying herself as a grieving widow blindsided by her husband's secret financial arrangements. However, under Thomas's methodical cross-examination, her story began to unravel. Contradictions emerged, timelines didn't align, and her explanations for the offshore transfers grew increasingly convoluted. "Mrs. Wilson," Thomas asked in his calm, measured voice, "can you explain why you told your father-in-law he had no legal right to remain in the guest house when property records clearly show it had been legally transferred to your husband's separate holdings?" Amanda's composure finally cracked. How was I supposed to know about some secret property transfer? Michael handled all that legal nonsense. "So, you admit you didn't actually know the legal status of the property when you evicted Mr. Wilson?" "I needed him gone," she snapped, then immediately tried to backtrack. I was grieving. Having him there was too painful a reminder." Judge Martinez's expression darkened at this exchange, her pen scratching rapid notes on her legal pad. When the final ruling came 3 days later, it exceeded even Thomas's optimistic projections. Judge Martinez not only upheld Michael's separate will in its entirety, but also ordered additional financial compensation for my wrongful displacement and emotional distress. Amanda's attempt to appeal was quickly denied, with the judge citing the overwhelming evidence of deliberate financial manipulation. As we left the courthouse after the final hearing, Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder. "Michael would be proud. You stood your ground with dignity." Despite the legal victory, I made a conscious decision that surprised many, including Thomas. I chose not to pursue criminal charges against Amanda for the forged documents and fraudulent transfers. The evidence would likely have supported such charges, but the thought of extended legal battles and the continued reopening of emotional wounds felt counterproductive to healing. "Are you certain?" Thomas asked when I explained my decision. "What she did was criminal." "I'm certain," I replied. "Michael is gone. No legal punishment will bring him back or ease that pain. I have what I need now, justice and security. The rest is just vengeance, and I'm too tired for that." With the legal matters resolved, I began the process of rebuilding my life. The financial settlement provided security I had never imagined possible. The life insurance policy alone was substantial, and combined with my restored retirement savings and the value of the guest house property, I found myself in a position to make meaningful choices about my future. The first decision was perhaps the most personal. I purchased a modest 2-bedroom home near Evergreen Cemetery, within walking distance of Michael's grave. The house needed renovations, which gave me a project to focus on, a reason to get up each morning and engage with the world again. Through Thomas, I connected with several of Michael's college friends, whom I had never met, people who shared stories of my son's university years that filled in gaps in my understanding of his life. One friend, David, was an environmental engineer who had collaborated with Michael on several projects. Our conversations about sustainable design and Michael's vision for community-focused architecture became a lifeline to my son's legacy. 4 months after the court ruling, I received an unexpected call from Westbrook Engineering. The sustainable housing project for low-income families that Michael had been passionate about was moving forward, and the board wanted to name it in his honor. They invited me to the groundbreaking ceremony and asked if I would consider serving as a community liaison for the project, a role that would leverage my teaching background to conduct educational outreach. For the first time since losing Michael, I felt a sense of purpose returning, a way to honor my son while creating something meaningful in the world he had left behind. I accepted the position immediately. 1 year after Michael's death, my life had found a new rhythm. My renovated home became a place of peace, with a garden that reminded me of the one I had tended at the guest house, but was uniquely mine. Photos of Michael and Sarah filled the walls, no longer triggering overwhelming grief, but instead offering comfort and connection to the 2 people I had loved most in the world. Each Sunday morning, rain or shine, I walked the short distance to Evergreen Cemetery, with fresh flowers for Michael's grave. These visits evolved from tear-filled monologues to peaceful conversations, where I would update my son on the week's events, sharing small triumphs and ongoing challenges, as if he were sitting beside me on the small bench. The Sullivan Building project passed final inspections today. I told him one crisp autumn morning, watching leaves dance across the manicured cemetery grounds. 20 affordable housing units, all with the sustainable features you designed. Families move in next month. You would love seeing children playing in that courtyard space you insisted on preserving. My relationship with Thomas Wilson had transitioned from professional to personal. Our weekly meetings to discuss legal and financial matters gradually evolved into friendship, with regular chess games at a local cafe where we discussed everything from politics to philosophy. Thomas, a widower himself, understood grief's complex terrain without needing explicit explanations. "Grief doesn't really end," he observed during one of our games. "It just changes shape, becomes something you carry, rather than something that carries you." I found truth in his words. The crushing weight of early grief had indeed transformed into something different, a companion, rather than a captor. Michael's absence remained a constant in my life, but it no longer defined every moment of every day. Community became an unexpected source of healing. My new neighborhood was filled with retired professionals and young families, a vibrant mix that prevented isolation. I joined the local historical society, offering walking tours that combined my love of history with newfound appreciation for architecture gleaned from Michael's work. Neighbors invited me to dinner parties and holiday gatherings, gradually weaving me into the social fabric of the area. The process of forgiving Amanda proved more challenging than I anticipated. In the immediate aftermath of the legal victory, I had felt magnanimous in declining to pursue criminal charges. But true forgiveness, I discovered, was a more complicated journey. Some days, remembering her cold dismissal, the nights spent in my car, the callous betrayal of my son's memory, anger would flare anew, surprising in its intensity. I discussed these feelings with Dr. Reynolds, the grief counselor I had finally begun seeing 6 months after Michael's death. Forgiveness isn't an event, it's a process, she reminded me. And it's not really about Amanda. It's about freeing yourself from carrying that burden. Her words echoed in my mind when, 13 months after Michael's death, an unexpected letter arrived in my mailbox. The return address was unfamiliar, a P.O. box in Connecticut. Inside was a single page of expensive stationery, covered in Amanda's distinctive handwriting. The letter wasn't exactly an apology. Amanda didn't directly acknowledge wrongdoing or express remorse for her treatment of me. Instead, she wrote of regrettable circumstances and unfortunate misunderstandings. She mentioned moving back east to be closer to her parents and starting a marketing consultancy. The closest she came to contrition was a single line near the end. Michael would have wanted us to find peace with the past. After reading the letter twice, I placed it in my desk drawer without responding. It wasn't the apology I might have once needed, but I recognized it as Amanda's limited attempt at closure. Whether for my benefit or her own remained unclear, but it no longer seemed important to distinguish between the two. The most unexpected development in my healing journey came through teaching. 6 months after the court settlement, I remembered the business card Darius Johnson had given me during our chance encounter in those dark days of homelessness. On impulse, I called the number, unsure if he would even remember our brief interaction. Not only did Darius remember, but he was enthusiastic about my potential guest lecture. "My students would love hearing from an experienced teacher with your perspective," he insisted. "Just one class, whenever you feel ready." That one class became a regular weekly session, which eventually expanded into a part-time position, teaching a senior elective on local history at Roosevelt High. Standing before a classroom again, engaging young minds with stories of the past, I rediscovered a fundamental part of my identity that grief had temporarily obscured. Through teaching, I also gained new perspective on material possessions, having experienced both their absence and abundance within a single year. I found myself sharing these insights with my students, particularly those from privileged backgrounds who had never known want. "The things we own are just things," I told them during a discussion about economic disparity in historical context. "I've had everything and nothing within the span of months, and I can tell you that relationships, purpose, and inner peace matter infinitely more than possessions." As the first anniversary of Michael's death approached, Thomas suggested creating some meaningful ritual to mark the day. "Anniversary dates have power," he noted. "Better to acknowledge that and channel it intentionally." Taking his advice, I organized a small gathering at Michael's grave, inviting only those who had truly known and valued him: a few college friends, trusted colleagues, and Thomas. We shared stories and memories, each person placing a small stone on his headstone in the Jewish tradition, though our family wasn't Jewish. The symbolism of permanence, of something that wouldn't blow away or wither, felt appropriate. Afterward, we planted a young oak tree in the community garden of the Sullivan Building, Michael's affordable housing project that was now fully occupied. As residents joined us for the informal ceremony, many sharing how their new homes had changed their families' lives, I felt Michael's legacy continuing in tangible ways he would have appreciated far more than any monument. 18 months after losing my son, I stood in my garden, morning coffee in hand, watching birds at the feeder I had installed. The previous day had brought another milestone. I had finally sorted through the last boxes of Michael's personal effects, deciding what to keep, donate, or pass along to others who had loved him. The task I had dreaded for so long turned out to be more healing than painful, each item a connection to the extraordinary person he had been. The phone rang, pulling me from my reflections. It was Thomas, calling with news about a new sustainable housing initiative inspired by the Sullivan Building's success. They wanted my input on educational programming for residents. They specifically asked for you, Thomas said, a smile evident in his voice. Your work with the Sullivan families has made quite an impression. As we discussed meeting dates and project timelines, I realized how fully life had returned, different but rich with meaning and connection. The devastating loss of Michael would always be part of my story, as would those dark weeks of homelessness and betrayal. But they were chapters in a longer narrative, not the conclusion. Later that afternoon, I visited Michael's grave as usual, settling onto the familiar bench with a sense of quiet companionship. "I'm okay, son," I said softly, watching sunlight filter through nearby tree branches. "Not the same, but okay. You taught me more than you ever knew, both in life and in leaving it. I'm still learning from you every day." A gentle breeze rustled the flowers I had brought, and for a moment, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. Life's journey continues, even after devastating loss, taking us to places we never expected and revealing strengths we never knew we possessed. In my 68th year, I had learned this truth in the hardest possible way, but the learning itself was a precious gift. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to unexpected growth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of loss, resilience, and healing resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear that survival is possible, even in our darkest moments. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes our greatest strength emerges precisely when we think we have none left.